Hello and welcome to the True Crime Cocktail Hour. I hope you all had a pleasant week. Pleasant or not, the important thing is it's Friday. And that means it's time for us to sit down, relax for a second. You can have a drink with me if you want. And since you are interested in true crime and already here, why don't I tell you about a mysterious true crime case? For today's episode, we're going to southeast of Asia, to Indonesia to be exact. And we're going back to the mid-80s. And just a heads up, it's getting really dark today. And really creepy and really disgusting. So yeah, let's not lose any more time. Cheers. And let's deep dive into the story of Ahmad Suradji, one of Indonesia's greatest black magicians and one of Indonesia's worst serial killers. This tastes better than it looks. Our story begins in the mid-80s in Medan, the largest city in the North Sumatra province. This is a picture of the North Sumatra province. I mean, it's beautiful. It's got a lot of beautiful nature to offer. Actually, living there is a whole different story, though. There's poverty. There are frequent power cuts. The infrastructure is very poor, not to mention tropical illnesses. In the mid-80s, there are approximately 1,000 people who live in Medan, and one of them is very, very special. And this special someone is Ahmad Suradji, and he is a shaman. Now, to be honest, to most people of the village, he's more than just a shaman. He's actually a sorcerer and a miracle healer. At the time of this story, he is in his mid-30s and he lives in a house near the sugarcane plantations together with his wife Tumini and their children. As a shaman, Ahmad is highly respected, not only in the village itself, but also beyond. There are so many people traveling for hours all the way up to Medan just to be able to see this miracle healer. And rumor has it that Ahmad Suradji possesses supernatural abilities that go far beyond those of a normal shaman. Allegedly, he is able to determine the weather, he is able to predict the future, and he's able to talk to spirits and demons. So it's not always just about healing. A lot of his customers and patients also have alternative motives, if you know what I mean. For example, a lot of politicians, show up to have their future predicted just to see whether they be elected or not. And then a lot of people also want their unpopular neighbors cursed. And then on other times, just wives will show up at Ahmad's place and demand a love spell to stop their husbands from cheating on them. And believe it or not, shamans are actually something that is very natural at the time in Indonesia. A lot of people believe in magic and black magic, and therefore also in the miracle healing powers of these shamans. However, a lot of people will also go and conceal the fact that they visit a shaman, because at that time, honor is still a very important thing, and visiting a shaman, asking for his or her help, would suggest to other people that you are not doing so great in your life, that you are unhappy, that you have problems, that you're not always in control. And I guess it's the same still today, people don't want it. Ahmad Suradji is also particularly popular with female patients. Why? Because Ahmad has fathered 9 children in the shortest amount of time and is therefore believed to be able to increase a woman's fertility. However, it must be said that not all of his 9 children are from his wife Tumini. No, only 3 of those 9 children are hers. Interestingly, Tumini is not Ahmad's only wife. He has 2 more, and these 2 other wives are Tumini's sisters. That's right. He has 3 kids with each of them, and they all live under the same roof, which is also something that is not that rare in Indonesia in the mid-80s. So I guess it's fair to say that Ahmad is actually doing really great. I mean, he has 3 wives, all of his children, he lives in this house, his clientele grows and grows, he's highly respected, However, recently, something dark had begun to slumber inside him, something that no one suspected, but what would soon find its way to the surface. Now, before we get into this in more detail, let's take a quick look at Ahmad's past life. Ahmad Suradji was born in North Sumatra in 1949 as the eldest son of 4 children. His father was also a shaman, and the two of them were really, really close. And his father, when Ahmad was just a kid, started teaching him everything about herbs and their natural powers, magic, and black magic. So just to put that in perspective, when Ahmad was only 12 years old, he already experimented with his own curses and spells. However, there was one incident 4 years prior to that, when Ahmad was 8 years old. And this is when he fell into a 13 feet deep well and miraculously survived. And it was probably just luck, but a lot of people were like, oh my God, he survived. He's got to have these supernatural powers. He's got to have healing powers. And even his mother, from that point on forward, started calling him Nasib, which would translate to fate. But speaking of fate, shortly after Ahmad's 12th birthday, his beloved father passed away, and it left Ahmad feel really, really lost, and actually his whole nature kind of changed, unfortunately for the worse. For example, Ahmad started to neglect school. Eventually he dropped out completely, and then he turned to stealing in order to survive. More or less successfully, he was caught stealing not once or twice, but several times, and eventually authorities were just fed up with it, and Ahmad was actually sent to prison at the age of 16 or 17. And just so you know, he was just not supposed to spend a year or so in prison. No, he was actually sentenced to 10 years in prison. And there was no such thing as being released early due to good behavior. No, Ahmad actually had to spend the 10 years in prison. Indonesian prisons in the mid-80s are not exactly a walk in the park, right? And the only thing that helped Ahmad get through it all was meditation. That's all he did. He meditated the whole day. Okay. Now, I don't really know if it really was meditation, but when he was released, Ahmad, for the first time ever, kind of regained hope for himself and for his life. It was the first time that he actually knew what he wanted to do with his life. And he wanted to step in his father's footsteps. He wanted to become a shaman, just like his dad. So Ahmad went deep into the jungle of Indonesia, and he spent weeks there, and he barely ate anything. He just meditated the entire time and soaked up all this knowledge. He would examine herbs and their natural healing powers. And one day when Ahmad got back from his jungle trip, a friend visited him, and this friend really fell sick. He was not really doing great, but surprisingly, after just spending a couple of days with Ahmad, this friend regained strength and he actually recovered. And from that point on forward, it was official. Ahmad had these healing powers. He was a miracle healer. So Ahmad works now as a healer. He gets married 3 times. He fathers all of his 9 children in the shortest amount of time. And at the beginning, when Ahmad was just starting out to work as a miracle healer, the family financially was not doing so great exactly. But as the numbers of customers increased, so did the family's wealth. However, even though Ahmad is doing fine, he is convinced that he has not yet reached his full potential as a shaman and miracle healer. He has just not yet reached his goal of becoming the greatest and most respected shaman in whole Indonesia, right? Something was missing and something was wrong. So we are now back in the year of 1986, and Ahmad at the time is 37 years old, right? And then one day in 1986, Ahmad has a dream that would change his life forever. In this dream, the spirit of his deceased father appeared to him and also spoke to him. And his father said, "Son, you have what it takes to become the greatest shaman the world has ever seen. You can become so powerful that you can soak up all the knowledge the world has to offer. You will be so powerful you can destroy all of your enemies and cure all diseases. But there is a catch to it all. There is a sacrifice to be made." But what is this sacrifice? His father continues to explain that, son, in order to become the greatest shaman the world has ever seen, all you gotta do is drink the saliva of 72 women. Okay. Now Ahmad, convinced that this was not just a dream, it was all way too real for that. He is certain that this conversation with his father actually did happen, and he wants to do what his father told him to do. The question is, how? Because there are a few guidelines, the small print at the bottom of the paper, if you will. For example, the woman must not be related to him by blood or marriage. And then it would also not be enough for a woman to just spit in a cup. And also kissing would not do it. No, Ahmad actually has to kind of get in there and really lick the saliva out of the woman's mouth. Not to mention the fact that Ahmad has no idea how he's supposed to explain all this. Ahmad eventually comes up with a plan, but before we get into detail how he puts this plan into action, just let me say real quick, today's case is really not about anything sexual. There's no sexual assault or anything of that sort, okay? So just so you know. The murder series began in summer of 1986 when one day a young woman showed up at Ahmad's doorstep and asked him for help. This young woman, she just wants to be happier in life. She wants to finally reach all of her goals, and just be a happier person. And she hoped that Ahmad could be of any assistance. And Ahmad was just happy to help her for the equivalent of $200, which is a fortune back then that people have to save for years in order to achieve. And so Ahmad and this woman, they sit down and she basically tells him her entire life story, everything that just went wrong in her life and why she was ultimately so unhappy. And then she just casually mentions that she told no one about the fact that she wanted to visit Ahmad. No one knows that she is here. And Ahmad senses his chance. So by that time, it was already getting dark outside, and Ahmad told this woman that he was willing to help her, but in order to perform a very specific ritual that would ultimately help her live a happier life, they would have to go someplace else. And so they get up and they start walking in the direction of the sugarcane plantations. Ahmad brought a rope, a shovel, and a sack with him. So after about half an hour of walking on this abandoned road, they eventually turned left into the sugarcane plantation, and they just keep walking and walking until Ahmad eventually stopped. They had reached their destination, and Ahmad now continues to explain that they have to dig a hole together, a hole that should kind of function as some sort of a grave for her old unhappy life. And so the two of them start digging, and sometimes she will dig and sometimes he will dig. They actually share the work. But once this hole was dug, Ahmad asked this woman to climb into the hole. But that's not all. Before she's supposed to climb into this hole, this woman is supposed to have her feet and hands tied up. But again, Ahmad has a very good explanation for this. He tells this woman that the ritual would set free so much energy in her body would just not be able to withstand it all, and it would try to push the energy away from it. And for some reason, having her hands and feet tied up would prevent that. But girl, this woman lets everything happen to her. She does exactly what he says. She trusts him completely. And so she climbs into this hole with her feet and her hands tied up. And once she did, Ahmad just proceeded to fill in the hole with soil and dirt until this woman was buried all the way up to here, all the way up to her upper body. Her hands are beside her body, and this woman can literally not move anymore. But instead of performing a ritual, this dipshit just kneeled in front of her and strangled her with his bare hands. So now, just a heads up, it gets really creepy now, okay? So when this woman was dead, he would take her head and turn it in a way that he could just lay underneath it and drink the saliva that was dropping out of her mouth. So after he was done with his saliva shot, he actually buried the woman Again, very disturbing, he buried her body in a way that her face would be facing his house, because Ahmad thought that her spirit being focused on his house would gain him even more strength. And while he's at it, he can also take her jewelry and all of her valuables. And Ahmad, after the murder, just went home and just pretended nothing happened. So after his first murder, Ahmad Suradji just continued on with his daily routine. He heals, he prays, he meditates, he curses. However, for some reason, he now has these unusual demands. For example, they should never tell anyone that they would visit Ahmad. They should come alone. They should come in the evening or at night. They should wear their most valuable jewelry, and they should pay in cash for the success of the ritual, of course. And so Ahmad found his next victim just a couple of weeks later. But this time, this sicko even let this woman dig the entire hole by herself. And while she was doing that, he was just standing there and smoking one after the other, because he's also a chain smoker. And he murdered his second victim the exact same way he had murdered his first victim, saliva shot inclusive. Now don't get me wrong, his first victim was reported missing and searched for. But after days of searching and coming up with basically nothing, I guess officers just eventually gave up. And so Ahmad Suradji murdered again and again and again and again. And the procedure was always the same. Sometimes there were months between the murders, sometimes just a few weeks. It's fair to say Ahmad Suradji has long since become a serial killer. He murders regularly, having his saliva shots. He is still far from reaching 72. Things are just not fast enough. He has a lot of female customers, but not all of his customers are eligible. Like, some have too much of a social circle. Some women even admitted to Ahmad during the meeting that they had told someone about their appointments with him, unaware of the fact that it probably saved their lives. And so the murders continue undetected for 5 years, and more women disappear under the soil of the sugarcane plantation. And then one day, Ahmad finds his next victim, but this time things should go a little bit differently. Because once this woman learned that she was supposed to go out into the dark alone with Ahmad, a strange man, she got scared. And so she asked Ahmad if it would be okay if his wife Tumini would accompany them. She would feel safer then. And now Ahmad doesn't really know what to do. He ponders whether he should just blow everything off and wait for his next victim, or if he actually should make his wife a witness. And Ahmad decided to take his wife with them. And so he went up to Tumini and just told her, "Come with me." And Tumini didn't even ask. She just got up and left, She just obeyed. And this poor woman had to watch everything. The digging of the hole, her husband strangling these women with his bare hands, the saliva shot. Now what do you think? How will she react? What will she do? What do you think? Believe it or not, Tumini actually becomes his accomplice. Why? Honey, I have no idea. There are different sources who say that she was maybe scared. And then there were other sources who said that maybe all the jewelry and the valuables they would take from these victims kind of blurred her vision. And from this point on forward, Tumini is present every time Ahmad murders one of his victims. Tumini even goes one step further. She will go into the village and just talk to women who are eligible, and she advertises her husband. But then, in 1997, 11 years after the first murder, the killing should come to an end. When on the 24th of April 1997, a young woman called Sri Kemala Devi showed up at Ahmad's doorstep. Now, Sri Kemala Devi is 21 years old. She has marital problems and she is scared about the future, and she asked Ahmad for help. Now, before you start rooting for her, honey, I'm so sorry, but she will not survive this appointment as well. She is also murdered by Ahmad and buried in the sugarcane plantation. Yeah. But immediately after her murder, it started to rain for days. It was rain that not even Ahmad could stop. And what happened is that the rain slowly softened the soil of the sugarcane plantation. And just a little while later, a farmer eventually found a hand sticking out of the ground of the sugarcane plantation. And thus, the body of the last victim, Sri Kemala Devi, was finally found. Now, Sri Kemala Devi was actually reported missing by her parents, but her body was the only body that was found. No one had a clue about all the other bodies under the soil of the sugarcane plantation. And so Sri Kemala Devi's parents, they told officers that they were suspecting the husband. Like I said, the two had marital problems, and so they actually investigated against the husband, and this husband was facing the death penalty. Luckily, this husband had a waterproof alibi. And it turned out that Sri Kemala Devi had in fact told someone that she was gonna visit Ahmad. She just did not admit this to Ahmad during the meeting. He had no idea. Sri Kemala Devi had a 15-year-old rickshaw driver drive her all the way up to her appointment with Ahmad. And she was so excited about her appointment that she actually told this 15-year-old rickshaw driver. And once this guy heard about her murder, he went straight to police. And it was the first time that the name Ahmad Suradji would ever come up. So the officers went straight to Ahmad's house and they questioned him about Sri Kemala Devi, and Ahmad admitted that he had met Sri Kemala Devi. I mean, there was no other option. It would have been stupid to deny it after the witness testimony, but he said that he sent her home right after the ritual, and the officers believed him. But now that the husband was ruled out and there were no other clues, officers looked into other missing person cases, and there were quite a lot of them in the last 11 years, and some of them had very worrying commonalities. Because it turned out that Sri Kemala Devi was not the only woman who had told someone about her appointment with Ahmad, and eventually officers turned up at his doorstep again, this time with a search warrant. Now, Ahmad Suradji obviously denied everything, but the jewelry they found in his house told a different story. So Ahmad Suradji and his 3 wives were arrested. So now that there are clues that Ahmad Suradji is actually involved in a whole lot of other missing person cases, the officers started to assume the worst. Perhaps there are other bodies under the soil of the sugarcane plantation. And so they start digging. And so they find another body, and another one, and another one, and then 5 more, and then 10 more, and then 20. After weeks of digging, the police find a total of 42 bodies in the sugarcane plantation, all with their face facing Ahmad's house. So under the weight of the evidence, Ahmad eventually confessed to 1 murder, that of Sri Kemala Devi. Then he confessed to 16 murders. Why 16? Because they found jewelry of 16 missing women. But what's the point? What is he doing? And yeah, what can I say? He eventually buckled and just confessed to all 42 murders. As part of the investigation, this is super creepy, Ahmad Suradji was actually brought back to the scene of the crime, the sugarcane plantation, and they used the moniker to actually reenact the crimes, saliva shot and everything. Ahmad Suradji was eventually put on trial, and he was found guilty of 42 counts of murder, and he was sentenced to death by firing squad. So let me tell you about the way he reacted about his death sentence. He said, quote, "We are all just human beings. We all have our strengths and weaknesses. If I remember correctly, I killed 42 women." His 3 wives also had to stand trial. His first wife, Tumini, she was sentenced to life in prison for accessory to murder. His 2 other wives, her sisters, were actually acquitted because other from promoting him, there was nothing they could be prosecuted for. The sorcerer from hell, as he was henceforth called by the media, asked for several pardons, all of which were rejected, and his last wish, seeing his wife Tumini for the last time. Oh, and of course an hour in the love cell. It probably wasn't about her at all, it was just about his needs. Doesn't matter though, because also the love cell was denied. He was allowed to see his wife Tumini, but that's it. Ahmad Suradji was executed on the 10th of July 2008 by firing squad. He died at the age of 59. Only 6 of his 42 victims were identified. So that was the story of Indonesia's worst serial killer, Ahmad Suradji. Let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up so I know that you enjoyed this episode. And what's left to say is that I hope you have a lovely weekend ahead of you. Try to relax a little bit. And yeah, if you don't have any plans next Friday, I don't know, meet me here for another cocktail and most certainly another mysterious true crime case. Thank you so much for your support, and I'll see you next week. Mwah.